Hello, everyone. Good morning. I think that you can hear me. I can see myself in the extra little screen. Thank you all for attending our session. My name is Foteini Aravani, and I am a curator at the Museum of London. The session that I'm going to chair is called Collections with Feelings, and it's a panel session on love, hate, and dreams. I think that it became very obvious during the pandemic that emotions and feelings started taking over our lives. We started expressing ourselves more openly. We felt the need to get closer with our emotional side, with other people. We started being more creative and we started dreaming in a different way. So that started making me think, where are all these emotions in the museums, in the collections? Where is the love, the heartache, and the rock and roll in museums? So I invited these panelists that bring together these themes through their work, and they create direct and relatable human experiences through their projects. So we're first going to hear from Vicky Ikwiewski-Broad, the principal record specialist at the National Archives, focusing on diverse histories. So Vicky very recently curated an exhibition at the National Archives called With Love, which is letters of love, loss, and longing, and she's going to be talking about it today. And after Vicky, we're going to hear from Drazen Grubisic, who is the co-founder of the Museum of Broken Relationships in Zagreb, Croatia. Drazen is an artist with a very rich portfolio and CV, but in 2006, he co-founded with his ex-partner the Museum of Broken Relationships, which turned into a brick and mortar building in 2010. And Sharon Slivinsky is going to finish the session. Sharon is a professor of information and media studies at Western University in Canada, and she founded the Museum of Dreams. The Museum of Dreams is a hub for exploring the social and political significance of dream life. And I had the privilege to work with her during the pandemic on a beautiful project called Guardians of Sleep, which aimed to record Londoners' dreams during the pandemic. So the session, just a reminder, is being recorded. You can ask your questions through the Swapcard app. And if you want to tweet, you can use the hashtag Museums2021. Vicky, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm just going to try and share my screen, so bear with me, and do let me know if it doesn't work. Can you see the slides?
Yes, it's great, Vicky.
Lovely. Thank you very much for confirming that. Okay, so yeah, I'm Vicky and I worked at the National Archives on this exhibition With Love. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit about that. The exhibition used letters and written words as a kind of lens into people's lives, particularly focusing on love. So this is an exhibition that was fundamentally about feelings, inviting audiences to make emotional connections essentially with items that sometimes were several hundred years old and maybe didn't automatically seem relatable. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the exhibition concept and our aims, how we attempted to tap into the emotions in our collections, and how we tried to make this engaging for audiences. So I've just got a picture of the exhibition opening on screen. So firstly, for some kind of standard COVID context that I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of across this conference, this exhibition originally opened on Valentine's Day 2020, not long before the original COVID-19 lockdowns in England. We had to close a month after it opened because of this. And then in January 2021, our wonderful web team helped us create an online version of the exhibition. And then miraculously, in July 2021, we reopened the exhibition on site for a final time. And we've only just closed the doors several weeks ago. So through this presentation, I'll be talking about this exhibition in its various forms. Where it's necessary, I'll occasionally differentiate between the different iterations, but mainly I'll be talking about the overall concept of all these forms of the exhibition. So for those of you who know the National Archives, we haven't long had a single themed gallery. For a long time, it was actually a treasures gallery. In 2018, we tried a single theme for the suffrage centenary, followed by a very successful Cold War exhibition. Then we came to this exhibition, With Love, Letters of Love, Loss and Longing. And for this, we trialled a different format that was intentionally trying to foreground the emotional relatability of the archive material we held. And instead of focusing on a single time period, it worked across a 500-year period of our collections. So this was all quite new and experimental for us. Sorry. So the National Archives is the official archive and publisher for the UK government and for England and Wales. We're home to millions of historical documents, which were created and collected by UK central government departments and major courts of law. Unlike a lot of collections, we can't accession material that doesn't come from government, so we can't rebalance our collections in that way. So for example, we have records relating to the Home Office, the Foreign Office, Central Criminal Courts. Fundamentally, we're not the first place you would think of to look for personal letters. And yet, there are far more personal insights that can be gained through a government archive than you might expect. Though untold in number, there are many reasons personal letters end up in our collections. For example, intercepted by police, found on captured ships, or used as evidence in trials, for example, for treason. And through these letters, we are given a brief glimpse into hidden worlds of the authors over this vast time period. But fundamentally, one of the aims of this exhibition was to change the way that people think about archives and challenge people's assumptions, particularly about a government archive, by surprising people with what survived and teasing out the emotional resonance. And actually, this was one of the original sources of inspiration. A work by Paul Cox-Siege, A Gust of Wind, and here it's shown at the London Design Festival 2010, I believe. And so one of the things we also wanted to get across, as well as emotions, was the tactile nature of archives and the relatability. It could be like a letter you have in your home. And so that was really key as well, the physicality. So briefly, some kind of examples of what we had in the exhibition. We took a broad look at love letters and actually kind of expanded the definition to look very much at written forms of love and expression. And this allowed us to cover a much wider range of stories and diversity of stories. So firstly, here we have a series of love letters between childhood sweethearts, Hetty and William Crawford. This is from the First World War. They were divided because of his service, so they would send letters backwards and forwards. And unusually, these survived in our records with his service record. Unfortunately, William did not return home. He died, I think, in 1917. And so this became kind of an everybody's kind of story that summed up in many ways the experiences of the First World War. And we could see some of the sentiments through the letters. Next up in the middle is an image of a medieval song written by a scribe on the back of another more formal document. So it's almost like a doodle. And the lyrics say, "Alone I live alone." And this is believed to be from the late 15th century. So a very different kind of expression and from a very different era. And finally on screen, I've got a kind of unusual take on written expressions of love. So we also included wills. And in this instance, this is the will of the famed lesbian Anne Lister and her lover, and relates to her relationship with her lover, Anne Walker. And in this instance, the will sheds a light on their relationship. And this allowed us to diversify some of the stories that were being told, particularly the more marginalised stories in a state archive. So hopefully you can start to see some of the emotions that these items were teasing out. Some of the themes we used through the exhibition were things like reputation and legacy, sacrifice for love, heartbreak, but the underlying one was really separation. And this is ultimately the one that had the biggest emotional resonance with audiences. Unbeknownst to us, when we were curating the exhibition, COVID was really about to hit the UK, and lockdowns were going to exacerbate those feelings of separation and underline the importance of reaching out to each other. So it was particularly brilliant we were able to move the exhibition online and eventually reopen on site, because the significance seemed to really increase through the pandemic of what we were trying to do. When we get to some of the audience response, I think it's clear to see that COVID created an extra layer of emotional meaning in the exhibition and the author's words. Little did we know that the subject would become so pertinent, and also the need to communicate so key. And going back to kind of basics like letter writing, I think was really important. So I just want to do a quick deep dive into one of the documents from the exhibition to show how this worked in practice. This is one of my favourite records because the words seem so relatable to me, and indeed this is a kind of common theme across the exhibition. A lot of the letters feel like they could have been written yesterday. So this letter says, ever since I phoned you on Monday, I just lived for tonight when I was to see you, darling. As a matter of fact, I stayed in bed all day yesterday. I didn't even get up to eat and just thought of you, counting the hours until I should see you. The letter continues. I only wish that I was going away with you, just you and I, to eat, sleep, and make love together. So if I reveal a little bit more about the letter, we learn this is a letter written by Cyril to his darling Morris. So essentially, this is a wonderful, rare surviving love letter between two men, written when homosexual acts between men were criminalised in the UK. So this was written in 1934. The author Cyril was just 22 when he wrote this letter to Morris. And it's actually unclear, as we only have one side of the communication, whether Morris reciprocates these feelings. Very little is known about Cyril, Morris, or their relationship other than what's contained in the letter. Lives that, they're very much lives that without this surviving material would likely be forgotten to history. Cyril says, I only wish I was going away with you. Indeed, at the time, the law and society would have made this really difficult. This letter was actually found during a police raid on the Caravan Club, a place where members of where people could meet for same-sex relationships in relative safety in Soho in the 1930s. So men were boldly able to meet other men at this time, but the material evidence is often destroyed through fear of the consequences. So this is an incredibly unique example. The club was eventually raided, and as it was being raided, Cyril, the author of this letter, ripped it up, hid it under a divan, and then it was pieced together and typed up by police. And that's the current format we have, which is why it says Exhibit 4 on it. 103 people were eventually arrested during this raid, and Cyril was committed to trial for aiding and abetting in keeping a disorderly house, but ultimately found not guilty. The owners of the club were, however, prosecuted and sentenced to hard labour. So this is an uncomfortable letter that in many ways shouldn't survive, but it's also a powerful testament to queer love in the 1930s and the determination to evade the law despite the potential consequences. And essentially, you wouldn't find this kind of record in many other places. It's because of the government context that it's actually survived, and because of the criminalisation. There was a really poignant audience reaction to this letter. Comment cards often said it was their favourite record, and lots of people commented saying that they felt represented, and it was nice to see their identity, their community represented. So just briefly to discuss, to touch on how we engaged audiences in this content. We had amazing content, however, it was largely paper or parchment records. They were very text heavy and often in difficult to read handwriting. So we used a lot of audio content to bring the recordings of letters to life and put these alongside the original documents to try and kind of very literally give them a voice. We also had an interactive area, a tactile area, where people could handle facsimiles of the letters in the exhibition and kind of supplementary material, so we could showcase wider content that we couldn't fit in the gallery otherwise. And we did this area as a bed to link to a couple of records in the exhibition. One record was a letter written by Robert Dudley to Elizabeth I. So they were kind of childhood sweethearts. And on the back of the letter that Dudley has written are the words, his last letter, added by Elizabeth. And this was found in a box by Elizabeth's bed upon her death. So we were trying to emphasize that nature that kind of no matter who you are, you know, this is a relatable concept, like having a box of letters under your bed. And then finally, we had a letter writing area, which was hugely popular, although quite hard to replicate online. But people were able to write their own letters to either send to a loved one, post them to Jodie Ann Bickley of 1 Million Lovely Letters, that project, or use a shredder option, quite controversial for an archive setting. But essentially, we were asking people to talk about their feelings, write things down, and then have that cathartic moment of potentially shredding them if that's what they wanted to do. So kind of finally, really, just to cover some of the audience reaction, this exhibition successfully appealed to a younger audience, a more diverse audience, and created a powerful emotional response. Lots of comment cards originally ended up being people writing empowering words to themselves or to other visitors, and it created a really lovely atmosphere. In terms of putting the exhibition online, one of the aims was for a wellbeing impact, because we were really kind of at the heart of the pandemic at that point, and we wanted to kind of try and support people through that. And in our feedback, 82% of people said the exhibition boosted their mood, which was a really, really lovely thing to read, and 76% said they felt a personal connection to the people in the letters. So for us, this was experimental but successful, considering the context. Footfall was never going to be what we initially hoped it would be, and yet the quality of engagement was in many ways higher than we anticipated. The time people spent, the emotions they invested, and their willingness to then take that forward, write letters and reach out to others. Have we made people who visited the exhibition think differently about archives? Did people leave feeling different emotions to when they entered the gallery? I like to think the answer to both of these is yes. And finally, I just want to end on an audience quote that really sums it up to me. So this comment card said, "What a joyful exhibition, even through the pain there has been connection and hope." And that's really what we wanted to give people, particularly as the context of lockdowns developed around the exhibition. We wanted to give a sense of shared experience and connection, and ultimately hope as well. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Vicky. That was such a beautiful presentation. I have to admit I didn't attend in person the exhibition, but I did visit the online version. And first of all, I was amazed that, I wasn't expecting that National Archives would ever, curate such an exhibition, but there was literally, it was so powerful. So well done. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
Drazen, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, we can start.
Perfect.
Hello to everybody. I would just quick description. So what the Museum of Broken Relationships is about. It consists of objects that have been donated by people from all over the world that remind them of their broken relationship, emotional relationship, not necessarily romantic relationship. I have to emphasize that. And what they do is they write the location of their relationship. They write the date the relationship lasted and short description. And now I would have to go back to 2004 and show you this object. It's kind of funny, right? Well, that's actually the object that started all of it. Because the museum was actually never meant to be a museum. It was supposed to be an art project. It was supposed to be an archive. It was supposed to be some safe haven for people's objects. And why? Well, the bunny that you just saw is actually the object that inspired all of this, because in 2004, Olinka Vishtica and myself were sitting in the kitchen and breaking up after 4 years. And it was really easy to divide all of the, the things that you use, the TVs and the chairs and tables and all of that. But then Olinka glanced at this bunny, which was standing in a corner of the room, and we used it as a pet, so to say. And one of those banal objects, but that really reminds you of all the good times you had, and just the thought of having this somewhere on my shelf and reminding me of failure, so to say, was kind of overwhelming. And we started discussing what could be done with these things. How can you preserve them and not have them remind you of your failure? And we started Googling, of course, if we can find something that exists that we could just send it to, but it didn't. So we started discussing, well, maybe some sort of archive, some sort of museum, something that holds it and keeps it. And we really thought that it's a great idea, because while Googling, we found out that all the advice that you get is to destroy these objects. So mainly women's magazines. We're giving you the advice to throw a party with your friends and make a bonfire of everything that reminds you of a failed relationship. But for us, it was kind of barbaric, because if you are in a relationship and you spend some time together and you influenced each other, it's okay now at the time of breaking up, it is hard, but later maybe you will want to remember, and maybe you will want to have something to remind you of it. And that's how the idea was born. We created the museum 2 years later as a small installation in Zagreb in a shipping container. We asked our friends and they asked their friends, and they gave these first 46 objects. And to my amazement, the creativity of people and the difference in objects and the stories was really surprising. You don't know when you're doing a crowdsourced project, you have no idea what you're going to get. So there is always this fear of, is it going to be boring? Is it just going to be plushy toys and love letters and that's it? But then, we had like, one of the first objects was a prosthesis from a war veteran, not something that you would expect. And the story was kind of sarcastic and it was funny. And then you see that the creativity was really through the roof. And the first rule we decided was that everything should be anonymous. It was because we wanted to reach out to real people, not to any kind of exhibitionist who really want to have their life out in the open. And the other reason is we didn't want to differentiate between famous and not famous people, because we really thought that everybody has equal say in the matter. When we did it, I'm an artist. I usually do exhibitions. I do that and I move on. But this started living its own life from the beginning. And I often had a discussion with my friends who are rock stars or people on the stage. And I was always teasing them that they're completely fake, because you can't tell me that you go out on Friday night and have yeah, let's give it up. And then you do the same thing next day. Like, come on, it's fake. And their main argument was the emotion they get from public in front of them is what moves. And this is what happened with this project. we started meeting people who donated objects, and it was so touching. It was incredible how much it meant to them. One of the first exhibitions, we started traveling after this because we started getting invitations to come here and there. And one of the first exhibitions was in Slovenia, and we were approached by a 87-year-old lady that had her story from a Second World War. And when you talk to the lady and when she explained us what it is, and later we stayed in contact, and later we found out that that was the moment that she set up with her family and told them the story. So they never knew about it before. That on one hand, so we have people who donate objects, and it's kind of it's really touching to see where it goes. On the other hand, we have visitors because we became one of the most popular museums in Croatia. So we have a lot of visitors, and we have a small cafe right next to the museum. And often I sit there and I work, and people come and they say they don't know who I am, and they talk openly about it. First question is always, so what would you donate? And then the conversation starts and moves into introspection, discussion, their parents, their friends, their relatives. And you see that this 1 hour that they spend at the museum is something that will keep them thinking for quite some time later on. For me, I think that this is the most that art can do to make you think, to make you introspect in a way. Now, so it's been almost 16, 17 years since the start of the project. The collection grew to some 3,600 objects and stories. We've been traveling for this time. We've been to more than 56 cities all around the world. And it's amazing how through this collection, everywhere we go, the local partner is responsible for the part of the collecting locally. And then when we see what they collected, we combine it with our collection from our archive. So to have as wide picture as it could be. If something is not included, then we bring that from our archive. If it's too depressing, we bring the funnier stories. If it's and what turns out, how we started it, it's incredible how people developed it. So now we have any theme you choose from human life, we can illustrate it. So, for example, in our new display in Zagreb, we have a war room. There you can see from the letters from the First World War, Vietnam, suicide notes from people from Iraq, extremely touching story from Istanbul. It's a wedding dress donated by a girl whose husband-to-be was killed in a terrorist attack. And approaching any theme through these personal stories and objects, it's completely different when you just read about it or when you see it in the news. So yes, we do have emotional reactions from people that come out crying. That happens, but it's life. It's not so surprising. Also, we have the emotional parts where people talk about their family. This is also one of the hardest rooms to read. Disappointment in politics, disappointment in religion. We had a little display showing the influence of college on breakups as well, because of course, whenever something happens, people feel it, the relationships suffer, and we get it to our museum. So the potential, it's pretty overwhelming, and it's just happening by itself, which is the most amazing part for me. So I will stop here. I could talk for hours, but I'll stop here and we can have a Q&A later. So.
Thank you so much, Drazen, for sharing the story. Like, I can't get over the fact that, you know, your own breakup, like, literally inspired, like, a project, an art project that turned into a museum, and it has, like, so many people relate to it, like, across the world. Like, that means something to, like, us more, like, you know, traditional, you know, museum workers, what we should be doing with our collections and how we should engage our audiences. So now it's time for Sharon to talk about dreams in collections.
Hi, everyone. Hello from Canada, where the sun is just coming up behind me. I just an editorial comment on my colleagues. My heart, I don't know about you guys, but my heart has been thumping over here as I've been listening to the presentations. Of course, thinking about my own breakups and the objects that I shredded or burned or should have sent them onwards. And then it was interesting with Vicky, the deep dive you did on the letter from Cyril. I have to say, I got really angry as a queer person myself, and the fact that the National Archives has this letter and has sort of captured it because of the history of police brutality against queer communities. Anyway, just some emotions I wanted to share with you guys as we talked through. Okay, I'm gonna try to share a screen as well. Let's see what I can do here. Give you not this. I just wanted to share with you the Museum of Dreams this is the landing page for the Museum of Dreams. The museum came about, I'm an academic and I wrote a book about dreams. I tried to get the political scientists interested in dreams as objects that contain an incredible amount of information. Dreams are not a well-respected object, so to speak, in the academy. Yes, in psychology departments to a certain extent. So of course, Freud is often no longer taught. But it came out of just a project that I had done called Dreaming in Dark Times. And I needed a place to kind of put all the dreams that I'd found in the historical record. The project very quickly became a collaborative one. And a little bit like the Museum of Broken Relationships, people started coming to me with, with dreams, or artists that wanted to work on dreams, or academics who were interested in dream life and didn't have another place to go. As far as why dreams work as emotional objects, I think of dreams as the most sensitive seismograph we have, actually, for both conscious and unconscious resonances of our emotional life. They are an amazing record for the edges of affect that we aren't even possibly consciously aware of. The museum takes a really broad approach, certainly influenced by the history of psychoanalysis, and contemporary clinical work, I would say, about dream life and that kind of therapeutic relationship to dreams. But it also has one foot very firmly anchored in political theory and in social thought, trying to think of these objects as holding cultural life of emotions, I would say. And the COVID pandemic, of course, blew that up. I mean, we saw that during COVID, dreaming became a really important way for people to talk about their emotional life. I'm going to play you a little clip of one of the testimonies that we collected. Foteini got in touch with me, I don't know, almost a year ago now, maybe more, just for a consultation between the Museum of London and the Museum of Dreams. They were thinking about doing a big collection project and wanted to start collecting dreams. And Foteini and I spoke, and I said, "You can't do that. You can't talk to people and just collect dreams." And Foteini was like, "Why?" And we got into a long conversation, and it turned into a beautiful partnership where we did, in fact, speak to Londoners. We had a huge response to the call that went out, well over 500 people responded within a few days. Frankly, it was overwhelming. And then we set up a team that would gather testimony. So I'm going to play you about a 3-minute clip from one of the testimonies, because I think it's kind of a beautiful bit of a testimony that will be in dialogue, hopefully, with the panel. But just to set it up, so one of the things that I think of that's important about dreams is that they do a lot of work in terms of symbolization. Most museums, of course, even the ones that we were talking about today, already have objects that are sort of burdened with lots of symbolic content. And it's the museum's job to kind of represent and unpack and put those objects into dialogue with other things or the public. Dreams are already doing all that. The structure of how dreams build, they figure our emotional life. So the structure of dreams themselves already kind of have a lot of symbolic content. But what I loved about this particular interview and this conversation between Ruby, who's the dreamer in this case, and Amber Jacobs, who works at Birkbeck, was the interaction between them throughout Ruby's emotional life, which you'll see here. And to me, this is what's really important, and what's really important about the project, The Guardians of Sleep, was that dreams and the process of symbolization and the process of sharing that interior imaginary life can actually bind fear. Fear, as we know, of course, when it gets too intense, can approach trauma, and it can be very disruptive for the human psyche. So processes that help bind fear and turn it into sort of so-called normal anxiety are doing a huge amount of well-being work. And so I think the project had dreaming, of course, does that work. You know, the process we do sort of in conversation with ourselves, but the process of speaking to the public and then the kind of products that are coming out of that. We've been building a podcast, as you can see here, based on some of the testimonies. That binding process, that extension of the symbolic work of dream life is really important to helping contain the experience of the pandemic. At least that's my view, and maybe we can have a debate about that, about the work that museums do. Okay, I'm gonna start sharing now just this little bit of a video. See if I can get it to work. Can you see this now or no?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Satisfying with...
Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna set up the clip a little bit. So you see Ruby is the one that's speaking now. She's the dreamer, and Amber Jacobs is the interviewer on my right. And Ruby has just shared a dream, a very long and wonderful dream about being with this person that she doesn't really know, and she goes into a farmer's house, and the farmer says there's this long tunnel, it's full of bones, you're welcome to go down there, but you know, just beware of the long bones in the dream. It's an amazing dream. And Amber is listening carefully. Amber, who has some training in psychosocial studies, is listening carefully, and they have a long conversation about it. And Amber says sort of off the cuff, well, it's the dream about death, perhaps, because of the way they're talking. And Ruby says, oh, maybe. And then they have a laugh, and then Ruby talks about dreams of kissing people. We had a lot of testimony about dreams about kissing people. And then, but the tone shifts at this point, and I'm just picking up it's about, you see a 35-minute conversation, but I'm just picking up the conversation where Ruby starts to get, I would say, more emotional.
Was worse than if it had been dramatic in any kind of way, if it had been dramatic in a kind of like positive way, where it's like, I'm totally fine and everything's great, or if it had been like, everything's terrible, then I think I would have been able to kind of assign it as, dream. But because it...
Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong place.
Like, that's about that thing. Yeah. So I certainly think there is a COVID element to it, and it feels like it's connected to that. And there's been a lot more dreams about death, I think. I've dreamed about speaking to people that I knew who have died in the last year. And I dreamed that I could contact them and speak to them. And they were weird and quite disturbing, those dreams, because the conversations were so normal. So everything that happened, all the normal things are strange, and all the strange things are normal. So speaking to the dead, I had this boring conversation with this person that had passed away. And I'm sure it was just my brain trying to kind of like process. But you would think if you were having a dream about kind of grandiose subject like being able to contact the dead, and there's so much ritual in the dream before we get to that stage. I have to kind of engage my friends, and they have magical powers, and we can only do it if we work in a 3, and all of us have to kind of like put in our element, and then I will be able to speak to the dead. And then when I get through, they don't say any of the things that I was expecting them to say. They don't say anything reassuring. They're just confused as to what's happened. And that was it was such a disturbing dream, and partly because my friend had passed away. And so like then having that conversation where they didn't feel, I wanted a reassuring message. Like when people pass away, a lot of people talk about these dreams where they visit them and they say reassuring things. Yeah. They say, you know, I'm safe and I'm fine. And I was sort of expecting that. So to wake up and have this conversation that wasn't terrible, like it wasn't awful, but it wasn't satisfying, was worse than if it had been dramatic in any kind of way. If it had been dramatic in a kind of like positive way where it's like, I'm totally fine and everything's great, or if it had been like, everything's terrible, then I think I would have been able to kind of assign it as, dream. But because it had this element of reality, like it felt like a real conversation that you would have. It was a boring conversation. It was ultimately more disturbing somehow.
I understand. Yeah. So you were like, yeah. So there was a disappointment in the dream of a sort of answer or a solution.
Yeah. Putting all this effort in to make this thing happen, and then it just being, it wasn't disappointing as such, it was just sort of concerning more than anything, because it felt like we'd gone through this huge thing and the answer wasn't the answer that I was expecting, and it wasn't a reassuring answer, and I couldn't give it to anybody. I couldn't tell, like the people, obviously like my friends also experienced this loss, and I wanted to be able to tell them, I had this dream and everything was fine. They told me that they were okay. And I couldn't.
Yeah.
And that was horrible. That was very isolating.
Yeah. That's really powerful.
Well, I've really dragged the mood down now, sorry.
No, please don't apologise. It's really rich and so much, part of what we're all going through. I mean, do you feel okay? Do you want to carry on?
So I'll just stop it there, and you can see the interaction between Ruby and Amber there, which is quite delicate, I think. But I just wanted to sort of overemphasize again, for me, the importance of that moment where Ruby's had this devastating experience of losing a friend, as many of us, of course, did during COVID. And the dream is doing some work in order to try to process that experience for her, but the nature of the experience was such that it was itself isolating, and she couldn't even share the dream with her friends. The tension of the nature of the loss was, and the dream itself was one that it didn't necessarily connect her. But here was Ruby talking to a stranger, complete stranger, and was able to express some of what that experience was like. And I can't overestimate how important that is, how to be able to first put to voice, to symbolize to oneself, and then to put into language, and then to voice to another and be received, the nature of an emotional experience that is otherwise quite fraught and kind of inside oneself. To me, so it was a remarkable project, and working with that particular testimony right now for an episode for the podcast. Hopefully it'll be out next week. And I could go on about the nature of what it is to kind of continue to work with these testimonies and put them into different forms. But I think maybe we'll just stop there, and I'm happy to have a good conversation now. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you personally, because you gave me the opportunity to work on something that, I hadn't even, considered before. But I think all three of you gave us like fantastic examples and, great, different points of view and different like ways of looking at collections, looking at museums, like basically, I mean, started, a conversation, rethinking about the role of the museum and why are we here and what are we doing and what we're telling our audiences, basically. We have a few questions in the chat, but I would like, egoistically start with one question myself. Because Vicky, like, I think you touched upon yourself, like the National Archives is not particularly the collection that you will go to when you want to like look for like, love and love letters. I'm really intrigued about how you came about this exhibition, like what made you like find this theme and curate this exhibition.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess it kind of started with some of my research around LGBT love in the archives and coming across these occasional snapshots and letters between particularly men, mainly in our collections, and finding these letters just so amazing, so relatable. And kind of going outwards from there. So we were going to look at doing something in the kind of the link area of the archives, which is the bit you first come into, kind of some kind of installation, and then that expanded because we started to find these kind of occasional items. They're rare in our collections, but they're very powerful, reflecting on love and relationships and letters. So yeah, it came from kind of like, I guess a call out to staff really about sharing their knowledge and items where they had come across them, and that's how we got such a spread over 500 years of our collections, different time periods and different kinds of records. But once we started to find that, it just felt kind of too good not to try and tap into because of the emotional relatability that we struggle to sometimes find in our collections. So yeah, that kind of how it came about. And then we don't have vast amounts, so actually that was quite useful for curating because yeah, we could just kind of focus in on what we did have and trying to widen this definition. So it was about written expressions of love to ensure we could get that diversity of experiences, like being able to put Anne Lister's will in there. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Vicky. We have a question that I think that, it goes to all three of you. So someone is asking, how do you look after the welfare of visitors in the exhibition in the moment that it provokes strong emotions, good or bad? Drazen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, because we have quite a lot of experience with that. So we did I can say a little course, but we have a talk and we have some rules with people who work at the museum. So there are scenes often, you come in and you see that they're hugging with somebody, comforting them, talking. So a lot of time people who come out, really the first person they bump into are the people working at the entrance, and that's where the conversation starts. And often it's a little talk, or they sit down for a coffee to process what they've seen. And so there is also a part of the exhibition that we call the confessional, so to say, which is where you can write your own story. So that's a crucial part also of the exhibition, because oftentimes we have this outpour of emotions on paper. So that helps also a lot. But I think the best part is to communicate with people, because everybody wants this. If you come by yourself, then yeah, this is the first person you will talk to, and that works. Sometimes it's funny to see couples coming in. Usually the girl is the one that really wants to see it. The guy is kind of cool and he's like, okay, I'm just making company here. And every time they come out, he's like really hugging her or holding her. And you see this switch of like, oh, this is not going to happen to us. So, it keeps them closer. So it's yeah, and especially friends, when friends come in, friends are just like so into discussions later.
Thank you, Drazen. I find it amazing that, from like a very almost like niche art project that like when I first heard about, the Museum of Broken Relationships and how it started, like it reminded me of like Marina Abramovich's performance, like walking along, the Great Wall of China for 90 days to like meet in the middle and then break up with her partner. But like, Marina Abramovich's performance has like, stayed at that level of like, a documented, big art performance by, this big, amazing lady. But what fascinates me with your project is that, you have managed to like make it into such a relatable experience, and everyone can like, respond to it in a very, very, simple and true and honest way that makes it so powerful.
Just something that I really love about this project is oftentimes when you have a traveling exhibition and the cleaning lady comes, or there's a catering service and something, and then you're there and there's a bunch of people, and you turn around and you see somebody holding a platter with drinks, just like reading the story. It just sucks you in. I mean, one of the most often comments that we have is like, this is the only museum I've been to that I read every story. And this is great about this, because it just sucks you in. There is always something that you will be able to identify with. And the rest is just interesting or crazy or funny or terribly sad, or like life is. I always say it's a museum about love, just maybe upside down.
Thank you, Drazen. Sharon, going back to the question about how do we look after our visitors in an exhibition when it's like, full of, emotions. Like, I think that, you had, like our concern was, the other side. How do we look after, the dreamers in this very intimate sharing of, their dreams and their experiences? And how did you go about that when you started the interviews?
Yeah, well, we had to do an ethics protocol, as you might imagine. And a big piece of any of those protocols are thinking about the well-being of the human participants, as they're referred to in ethics. And so, yeah, we had a process for, dealing with people who were upset. We didn't have anyone that got, that encounter with Ruby was actually the most upset someone got, at least on camera, so to speak. What's interesting, though, too, is the way that we so-called processed the testimonies afterwards. I've been working with a composer and with a podcaster to develop these 15-minute episodes. And so it's been super interesting kind of turning people into characters, because that's a bit like what the process is like for the purposes of a podcast. And the composer's writing a theme song for each person. We're cutting the testimonies into to tell a sort of single story or an emotional trajectory, which of course any testimony's got many, many, pieces to it. And that's been really interesting. And we've been sharing them as we go with each of the dreamers, because each episode is about one person. We've been sharing it with people before we send it live. And people are usually really overwhelmed about how their testimony has been treated, so to speak. And they feel, for the most part, they feel affirmed, they feel recognized, and they feel like their own emotional journey has been highlighted somehow, which has been really interesting and amazing. So
yeah. Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to ask a question from the audience to Vicky, and then a couple of questions to Drazen. And then if we have more time, I will follow up with the rest of the questions. So Vicky, that's a long one. Emotions are instinctively understood as informed by individual circumstances, not by truth or facts, which in our world today can often be the source of controversy and cause issues. Emotions are universal and at the same time highly individual. Could they be the perfect vehicle, inspiration, way forward to help us reach out to all rather than targeted audiences and tackle the difficulties that surround the need to find different ways of decolonizing museums and their interpretive material? I hope I read it out, all of it. It was quite long, sorry.
No worries. Yeah, it's quite, I guess, a kind of complex question, but fundamentally, I think emotions are a great way into engaging audiences, and particularly where we have different challenges with our collections. So for the National Archives, we can't add to it. It's fascinating to hear about these wonderful projects today, but I'm almost jealous because some of these things are quite difficult for us to do with a collection that kind of comes to us as it is. I think emotions are such an important key way in, and finding that relatability in anything that you have, and if that can be an emotional relatability or something that draws out those feelings, I think that's really, really powerful, and it's how we engage wider audiences, and maybe audiences who aren't necessarily aware of us or using our collections already. So to keep that brief to allow other people to come.
Yeah. Thank you, Vicky. Drazen, I'm going to ask you two quick ones, because then one very big one just came in, which is around consent and copyright. And I think that all of us have to say a lot. I think that, especially with the Guardians of Sleep, like Museum of London have like different, copyright and consent form process, and then Western University had like a different ethics process, so it was pretty complicated, but we all we got there in the end.
We keep it very simple with that. If you're donating an object, you go online, you fill up the form, you sign it.
Right.
That's it. We don't exploit any of it commercially, so it's just in the museum or it's in a traveling exhibition, and that's it.
So Drazen, for you, very quickly, it's a question about accessibility when you get objects and stories in different languages. And is there a process where you decide or you select or you censor objects that will go in the display of the museum?
Since it's not, every story, it's really important that you understand every word right. So we translated everything to 11 languages. So when you come to the museum, when you come to the museum, you can read it in your own language. Because sometimes the nuances are so fine, it's really important that you get the language right. And selection, it's a huge process. For the Zagreb exhibition, when we change it, it takes about 6 months to choose the objects, especially with something great comes in and you decide to switch everything again and do it all over. But we have traveling exhibitions which are never the same, so we rotate quite a lot of stories, so quite a lot gets exhibited, so to say.
Okay, so the stream has gone. Thank you guys so much. It was like so amazing and beautiful and so unique. Like I've been, Vicky, I'm sure you too, I've been to so many conferences around, museums, collections, exhibitions. Like, I don't think that I've ever heard, people talking about, this, like more humane side of objects and stories. Thank you so much.
Sharon, I will send you a link of Croatian artists that did a big project on dreams on Venice Biennale a couple of years ago.
Yes, that would be amazing.
Just see what it's about. I mean, maybe you can use it somehow. So.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you
for your all. Time. Such amazing work.
Beautiful, talks, and enjoy the rest of your day and the conference. And I hope to see you soon in real life at some point.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.